Welcome to everyone who's made it here to today's presentation of Erik's master thesis done in collaboration with the Trax Ghana in the Upper East region of Ghana. I'm very, very happy to welcome you to this presentation, and very good to the collaboration we've had with Trax for years in multiple of various areas, really. So we will start off with Sam doing a brief presentation of Trax and their work for education and job training and equality between the sexes, and a bit about Trax Ghana. And then Erik will present his master thesis regarding assessing available water quality for drinking and agricultural use, and recommendations and summary of the work that was done in the field there in October last year. So with that, I give the word to you, Sam.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Sam Sabe, and I'm giving this short presentation as a kickstart of the master thesis presentation by Erik on behalf of Trax Norway and then Trax Ghana. I'll start with some background and factual information to help put things in perspective, but I'll be careful not to take away all the juicy information that Erik has to share with you. So to give you a bit of a background, the United Nations SDG goals, among them, the key one would be the issue about having safe and affordable drinking water. And this emphasizes, with emphasis on the word safe. Water can be anything, but it has to be safe. But in Ghana, about 3 million people have access to water that can be classified as safe. Drinking water for almost 80% of households in Ghana contain what we call fecal material, or put in blunt words, human excreta. The sad thing is about 700 hours are spent annually by girls collecting this unsafe water. And then the statistics out there, and then it shows that if we reduce 50% of the time it takes to haul water for most girls between the ages of 5 and 15 years, we could increase attendance rates by about 7 percentage points. And that is very tremendous given the areas where we work. So to give you a bit of where Trax Ghana and Trax Norway are engaged in, we work predominantly in the Upper East region, located at the northeastern corner on the map of Ghana, which you see here on the top right here. And to give you some regional facts about the area we work, you have a sea rainfall season with an average of about 1,000 millimeters. Now you can compare that to what we have in Bergen, where we have about 2,000 millimeters in a year. And for almost half the year, there's hardly any rainfall, and temperatures can soar up to about 45 degrees Celsius. The settlements we deal with are highly dispersed, and which means provision of water and sanitation facilities could be highly challenging. Now, Trax Ghana, Trax Norway, and Engineers Without Borders have been engaged, as Mariana mentioned, in various projects which have focused on the girl-child education. What we try to do up in the Upper East region is to stem what I call the inheritance or transfer of poverty from one generation to the other. And girls are the ones who are most affected. So our projects are geared towards stopping or reducing the high dropout rates that exist in these areas, which could be up to about 80% in some schools. We're also trying to stop teenage pregnancies and early marriages, which are actually a result of parental poverty. And we're also trying to reduce the transfer of parental poverty to children. So we want to break this generational, transfer of poverty from older to younger generation. So in this partnership, Trax and IAG have a shared purpose of actually dealing with that component of society that is most prone and most affected by this poverty, that is girls. But then, so you can ask, where does the connection come in with girl education and access to clean water? I showed you already some slides where I showed you that about 700 hours are spent all yearly collecting water by girls, and that means they have to go back to school or maybe spend most of their daytime hours doing this job. But in Upper East region, there's even a more serious issue because there is established the fact that there is high bacteriological contamination of the water that people have access to. And the areas you operate means it doesn't only mean have been ill, but it also means that girls, for instance, without any good access to water, especially during their area, every time when they are becoming adolescents, would have to drop out of school because, well, there's not enough water to take care of their hygienical needs, and there's not enough water for them to as well take care of themselves, like bathing all day. And adolescent girls are highly sensitive to this issue. So water in these areas is a very scarce and important commodity. There's a slide, in fact, there's a publication which actually came out just this year, this month, March 2023, which shows that if we improve water quality, this will impact girl child education. But in Upper East region, the question is, how polluted is the water we are dealing with? And this question has to be answered for us to be able to address the issues about how to correct the status quo. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the core issues that Eric's thesis deals with. So I'll pause here and then allow Eric to tell you what he's found out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and a very good warm-up to the World Water Day that is actually next week, and connections we don't necessarily think so much about when we live in Norway, where we can just drink water straight from the tap, and also how it influences girls' opportunities to go to school, for instance. So, Erik, we are looking forward to hear from you.
Great. Thanks for the great introduction, Sam. Let me just do like this. Let's work. Okay, can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. If there's any questions during the presentation, don't be scared to just interrupt because I can't see any comments or yeah.
If you raise your hands or just write in the chat or just jump in.
Yeah. So hello, thanks for inviting me. My name is Erik Storani, and I'm the master student that did the master thesis in 2022 in October, assessing water suitability for drinking and agricultural practices in the Upper East region, where Tracks Ghana and Tracks Norway operate together with Engineers Without Borders Norway. The main scope of the thesis was to look into the drinking water quality, but a minor scope also went to assessing agricultural practices and the raw water quality. So yeah, as Sam mentioned, we're in the northern part of Ghana, as you can see on this image to the top left. More specifically, we're also in the Bongo and Bolgatanga districts in between. And the field work, it lasted for 11 days in October. So we're in the rainy season. And we had 5 days with water sampling, where we analyzed physiochemical and microbiological samples. So we did analyses for pH, water temperature, turbidity, which says something about the solids in the water somewhat, I mean. And we also did chemical analysis on the elements, for instance, arsenic, lead, cadmium, iron, manganese, as well as the microbiological aspects, coliforms, and E. coli, which was the main indicator for human and animal contamination. 2 days went to interviews with local users on water supply, sanitation, and garbage disposal, as well as general field observations to look into aspects that could affect the groundwater quality that were used for drinking. We did water sampling and interviews in 4 local communities. So we have Dakio community, as you can see on the image to the right. Dakio community, Zarangomushi community, Kasingo and Kabusco community. And we had 17 water sources across these 4 local communities. 13 of these water sources were boreholes and 4 were surface waters. And a key thing to take note of is that we had 1 surface water source and sample as well 1 water source in every school, in every community. So we had always surface waters to compare groundwater quality to. And that is because you can always expect higher contamination in surface waters because it's more open to external contamination, like rainfall. And thus it also gives you some indication of the protective soil that kind of covers the groundwater. As Sam mentioned, it is mainly women and girls who do water collection. And this also takes the toll on loss of time, which could go to education, work, and leisure. It is also the poorest region of Ghana, which we will get in, we will talk more about in later slides. So yeah. In the spring of 2022, I did a literature review. So this is prior to the fieldwork, where we assessed what can we expect in the field, which parameters, which should we analyze for when regarding water quality. And what we find out was that, okay, we should look into heavy metals, microbiological activity, but also we assessed geological conditions. But we didn't look very much into it, so I won't talk too much about it. But when we came to the field, we could expect moderate groundwater potential yield of 0.2 liters per second, with a common 20 to 30 meters top weather zone and fractured bedrock beneath, with some protective soil coverage, which basically means that you can expect some groundwater. You have 20 to 30 meters of weathered soil that can hold water, as well as bedrock beneath, which can hold water. And then you have some soil coverage, which protects this 30 meters of weathered zone. That was kind of what I based on the literature review. But as you can also see on the image on the bottom, there's outcrops here, which indicate that it's not necessarily 20 to 30 meters down to the bedrock, because this is bedrock that's comes out of the soil. This image, it shows the different water sources that we sampled from. You have D1, D2, Dakio Dam, D3, and D4 in Dakio community. And the tap symbols symbolizes groundwater, while as the pin markers symbolizes surface waters. So we have groundwater, surface water source, groundwater, surface water source. As you can see, as I mentioned, we have a surface water source for every community. And we also have a primary school in every community, so Arangomushi Primary School. We have KG2, Kasingo Primary School. So that was the area of study. Yeah, and we also, as you can see from this image, and a little bit more on the soil. We have very common to have a red, kind of brownish soil, which indicate ferric soil. So you have higher concentration of iron that you normally have in, for example, Norway. Water sampling was the main activity. for the fieldwork. We did in total 167 water samples across 5 days. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, during the literature review in the spring of 2022, I assessed which chemical analysis should be done in the field, and what was concluded that we do heavy metals, fluoride, as well as nitrogen. So we collected the water, filtered it in the field, and then we sent it to the ALS laboratory group in Norway. I won't talk too much about that because that was basically the laboratory who did the analysis, and we just interpreted the results. However, the microbiological analysis we did ourselves in the field using the aquagenics field kits, which if anyone is going to do drinking water analysis in the field, I highly recommend the aquagenics field kits because it's very good, very convenient, and user-friendly. It is basically you collect 100 milliliters of water in a small plastic bag, and then you pour a growth medium into this 100 milliliters of water, mix it all up, and then you toss it into this compartment bag. And in this compartment bag, you have minor pockets of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they range in volume. So this minor pocket is larger than this one, and all of this is combined to a statistical analysis on the most probable number of bacteria in the sample. So compared to conventional microbiological analysis, aquagenics is quite strong because it can do the analysis in the field, because usually you need to incubate your sample for a set amount of time with an incubator to get decent results. But with the kit, we could do the analysis in the field, start the incubation in the field, and the incubation, it means that you allow bacteria to grow. It eats on this growth medium. So you give possible bacteria in the sample food, it metabolizes, and that's the incubation. We waited for 32 to 36 hours, and we stored the samples in my bathroom at the hotel because it was constant temperature. It was the best environment for temperature. It was high enough as well. So yeah, it's a very good kit. On the image to the top right, you can see a duplicate analysis of a groundwater source. So we took several duplicate analyses to ascertain that the results that we got out actually was correct. So you don't want these to differentiate, because then it wouldn't be a very correct analysis. And this first image in normal lighting is the E. coli analysis. This one. So you have the water sample in normal lighting, and if this sample turns blue in any of these minor pockets, you have presence of E. coli, which means that the water that you sampled have been in touch with the human or animal excretion. But you can also do the total coliform bacteria analysis, which is done in UV lighting. So you turn off the lights, and then you flash the sample with the UV light. And if the sample fluoresces, which this one does, you have presence of coliform bacteria. Coliform bacteria, it's not necessarily bad because it also includes every coliform bacteria. So you have bacteria from animals, humans, but also the soil, the environment itself. So it's not necessarily, doesn't indicate that the water is unsafe for drinking, but it's an indication of what you can expect. And what you do is that you match the color to the scheme that the aquagenics kit provides. So for instance, this duplicate analysis, it would have a most probable number of 1.5. because this one is colored. So it's very user friendly. 1.5 fully formed bacteria in the most probable number per 100 milliliters of water. So yeah. And the results that we got out from these chemical and microbiological analyses were that the initial worry of heavy metals and fluoride and nitrogen were of no real threat. The physiochemical results of the water sources were very, very good. We were worried about heavy metals due to mining, which were more common in previous years, and we were worried about fluoride contamination because Bongo, which is in Bongo town in the same district, have had several cases with high fluoride contamination. And you don't want fluoride in your drinking water because it can stain your teeth and it affects your skull bones as well if you have very high concentrations. And we were also worried about nitrogen because there is a high presence of agricultural activity in the area. So manure from animals as well as crop production with manure. But in all reality, the physiochemical results were great. They just had some high temperature values, but nothing of health risk because the rest of the parameters were good. However, the microbiological analysis proved to be a worry. Our initial worry was that water were contaminated with fecal contaminants, so feces from humans and animals. And we, in the master thesis, it was concluded that 7 of 13 drinking water sources were contaminated with such fecal matter. And the image on the that you can see is the collection of microbiological analyses that were done from 1 day of sampling. So all the samples that have turned blue or somewhat green, as this one, are contaminated with E. coli. So this one has E. coli, and this one, and this one. Yeah. So it's more or less 50% of the analyses have E. coli. And this one that you see on the top here is a project standard, which is basically clean water that you analyze to see and test if your analytical system works out. Because if this water, which is pure clean water from a service provider, turns to be contaminated, you have something wrong with on how you collect the water samples. Yeah. So if this one had turned blue, we would have a problem. So luckily it didn't. Table 12, it's just an extraction from my master thesis in Sorangomushi for microbiological results. And as you can see here on the first row of these sources, you have Sorangomushi Dam, which is a surface water source. It has an E. coli concentration of 136 in the most probable number per 100 milliliters of sample. It has that on Tuesday, and it has 483 on Friday. Whereas the groundwater sources, ZM1, ZM2, ZM3, have a substantially lower concentration. And some of them also have 0, which is great. So here you can see the difference from groundwater to surface waters. But as you can see, ZM1 has concentration of E. coli, which is not good. The international standard set by the World Health Organization says to be 0. It is also the standards in Norway that you should have no presence of E. coli in your drinking water. ZM1 is also the water source to a primary school in Sorangomushi community. It is the school of 300 children and staff that collect water from this borehole, which is not it's not good. Why it's polluted, we will get back to. but it most likely has something to do with the lack of toilet facilities. Yeah. We also did interviews and did some field observations during our fieldwork. We wanted a high female representation during these interviews because, as Sam mentioned, it is mainly women and girls who collect water for domestic use. So they had the best prerequisites to answer our questions. It was a questionnaire inspired by the Joint Monitoring Program by World Health Organization and UNICEF. I chose this questionnaire because I have never done any interviews of this sort before. So yeah, it was on water supply, sanitation, and garbage disposal, as mentioned. And the conclusion from the interviews was that it had the local groundwater table had limited coverage. Several groups stated that they had difficulties extracting water in the dry season. This is because you have less rainfall. You also have increased temperatures, which leads to higher evaporation. Long queues and collection time. It could exceed to 2 hours for some people, which means that they go to from the time that they leave the door and walk maybe 200 meters, they stand 2 hours in queue just to collect water once, and then they can do this several times a day, maybe 3 to 5 times a day, and which means that you have an enormous amount of time during the day trapped in collection of water, in water collection, which is not good. It's lost time that you could spend on education, work, leisure. Yeah. It was also concluded that every group that we interviewed practiced open defecation, which was also the worry from the literature review. So we got that concluded. We interviewed 12 groups, which ranged from 1 to 11 people. So we, in my opinion, we got to talk to actually a good amount of people, and they all practice open defecation. And for those of you who don't know what that means, is that it's you don't go to any toilet facility, you just go to the bush to relieve yourself, and that could have a negative impact on the groundwater quality. Every group also stated to have experiences with symptoms associated to waterborne diseases, which is not good as well. We will talk more about that on the next slide. But as you can see, you have 5 images, 4 which are from water sources. You have KB3 on the bottom left, KB2, KG1, and D4. So when we had assessed that you had pollution, and all of these, what they all have in common is that they're polluted with microbiological contaminants. So after we had concluded that, okay, these are polluted, what could be possible pollution sources? And for instance, KB3, you have stagnant water around the borehole here, which could, and when animals roam around and defecate, you could have a concentration of fecal matter that actually infiltrates down to the groundwater, which is not good. You also have a somewhat eroded apron. Could also be a possible contamination source, that you have seepage down through the borehole shaft. But this image is also the backside of the toilet facility of the girls, the school. So it's the septic system, septic tank. So it's a concrete structure beneath here that collects excretion from this toilet. And this toilet, it collapsed during the holidays, in the summer holidays. And why it collapsed, I don't know, but it did. And then the school covered it with metal plates to limit seepage. But that seepage will eventually come out when you have rainfall. Yeah, it's not good. And this toilet is basically maybe 20 meters from this borehole, I would say. KB2 is a different source. One problem here, as you can see, is that you have a donkey next to the borehole. which roams around, defecates, and also maybe licks the tap, because the tap, it might leak some water from it if you don't get everything pumped out when you, so they might lick the tap, it might pollute the water that comes out. And you also have crop production very close to the borehole, which is not optimal because it increases the activity of animals around it. It attracts animals. KG1 is this one. You also have crop close to the borehole, which is not necessarily good, but you also have something, you have stones to protect the borehole from water erosion, which is good. And in all honesty, I was a little bit surprised that this one had pollution, because on the surface it looks okay, but there could be problems with the protective soil coverage, or that you have some entries elsewhere. We also tried to blowtorch the tap, this one, where water comes out, with a blowtorch, disinfected for 2 minutes, but we didn't see any improvement in the microbiological quality of the water. D4 is another primary school of 300 children that had their water contaminated. And you can see the borehole in the back that we're analyzing. But what you can also see, if I just move this, I don't know if you can see this one, but I move this. You have standing surface water right next to the borehole, which could be a pollution entry of bacteria. And this, we asked the janitor of the primary school what was the thought when you constructed a borehole right next to a surface water source. But this used to be the old hand dug well before the school got a borehole. So this surface water is the source. Right down here is 10 meters down. You have a hand dug well in 1 meters of diameter and 10 meters of depth. Yeah, which is filled up with water, and then vegetation have reclaimed it. So it could be a possible pollution entry. Yeah. So what we did, according to following the World Health Organization's drinking water standard, stating 0 E. coli in drinking water, we mapped out the drinking water sources that were polluted. And you can see them here. What you can also see is that there's not necessarily any trend. There's no community that stands out. You have pollution in every source. And of course, the surface waters are also polluted. They're just not drinking water sources, so that's why they're not marked in red. But as I mentioned, every group that we interviewed said that they had associated symptoms with the waterborne diseases, which kind of differentiate what we see from the analysis. But it is also important to mention that people do not only collect water from one borehole, but several, which could be the reason why everyone had symptoms associated with waterborne diseases. Another possibility is that drinking water may not necessarily be the main cause of disease in the area. We talked to a local health clinic in Sorangomushi, and they believe that malaria to be the most prominent cause of diseases. And malaria also has some of the same symptoms of other waterborne diseases. Yeah. When it came to the minor scope on agricultural practices, it is, compared to drinking water, more difficult to kind of state if the water quality is sufficient or not, because there's no real international standard that says, okay, for livestock and poultry it should be 0. Of course, the better the quality, the better life the animals have, but some standards say 0, some say 10, some say 100 bacteria per 100 milliliters of water. But there's no real standard that concludes and is internationally acknowledged. but we compared it to the Food and Agriculture Organization by the UN. And what we concluded with was that livestock and poultry should be brought to boreholes and given water from the borehole and not necessarily drink from surface waters. When it comes to irrigation waters, so for crop production, there are some more recommending literature because the final user is humans. So we have more strict standards, of course. But it also depends a lot on what you produce. Is it rice? Is it millet? Is it paprika? Is it apples? Of course. But for this region, you have more maize, you have millet, you have sorghum, which are not necessarily, you cook them. So there's no critical health risk. So the thesis concluded that crop production should be limited to surface waters, regardless of surface waters being more polluted when it comes to microbiological contamination. And that is because every group that we talked to stated that they had difficulties collecting water in the dry season. So the coverage in the water supply is limited. So you don't want to exacerbate this situation with irrigation waters. So regardless of the surface water being more polluted, that was the recommendation in the thesis. But then it should also should follow some precautions. You should always boil your foods, or at least rinse them in clean drinking water from boreholes that are safe. Yeah. So after we had concluded which sources were polluted, what could be possible reasons for it being polluted, part of the thesis was to assess, okay, what can the communities do to improve the water quality that they drink and use for agricultural practices. And this is quite challenging because the socioeconomic challenges in the area are very prominent. You don't have money. You can't treat water as you do in urbanized regions of the world. You can't do any filtration. You can't do any sedimentation with chemicals as we do here in, for instance, Norway. You can't do UV radiation to kill bacteria. And this is because it's a poor region. And for instance, a borehole could be constructed by the government, but the government doesn't provide any financial structure to keep this borehole in good shape, in good quality. The government only installs the borehole, and it gives some tutoring to locals in maintenance of the borehole, but they don't provide any analysis, water analysis. They don't provide any finance, any system for it being. They just leave it up to the local community. And so when something breaks down, there's no financial coverage. It's only the community that needs to come together and pay any maintenance fee. A group that we interviewed stated that they had an annual fee for their drinking water from the borehole to be 20 cedis, which in the time of the fieldwork was 20 Norwegian kroner, which is, in all honesty, nothing in Norwegian standards, but for the families and the local community, it could be a very steep annual fee. And several families could have difficulties with paying this fee. And also there's no system to decide on which families are connected to which borehole because they collect from several boreholes. So when it comes down to payment, who should pay, it's a question. So if you have limited possibilities for treatment, what can you do? And what we looked into was more preemptive measures. So if you can't treat the water, let's limit pollution of the water. And since the physiochemical results of the analysis were sublime. It was very good. We focused on the microbiological pollution. So yeah, it is very simple solutions. One example is, for instance, fencing of the borehole. This is to minimize activity around the borehole, so you keep animals but also humans away. Not that you put a lock on it, but you just fence it to minimize activity. But then you also need to be aware that animals still need water. So if they don't go to surface waters, you need to allow them in and also pump water. You could also put your animals on leash. Some farmers did this already, but it could be. Could you mute, please? And some farmers had their animals on leash, which could be done by more farmers, of course, as long as you have finance to pay for a leash. If you're not interested if the community is not interested in fencing the borehole. What was also a problem was that neither of the primary schools really had any soap distribution. So you could have 300 children going to relieve themselves in the bush, but they had no access to soap to wash their hands, except for the borehole. So what we saw was that after they had relieved themselves, they would go to the borehole to wash their hands in clean water, but also touch the lever, the nozzle, which could, in theory, practice also contaminate the drinking water that came out. But the best preemptive measure is also to construct septic tank systems, in at least my opinion, because especially in the areas where you have a large mass of people, for instance, at schools. So I can show this if I can go back. One of the reasons why this source is expected to be polluted is due to lack of septic tank system. You have 300 children in one school who doesn't have any toilet facility, and they just leave the classroom, leave themselves in the schoolyard, and then go back inside to have class. So one of the best preemptive measures that you can do is have sanitation facilities to maintain good raw water quality for drinking. Of course, you have some possibilities for treatment. You could boil the water, the old classic. It is inevitably one of the best options that is available for treating, but then you also need to boil the water, so you need wood, which is not necessarily available. There's no burner stoves in the communities. There's no gasoline, or propane gas, so they would need to use wood, which is not necessarily available. You could also do solar radiation using what do you call it? Translucent water balls. So you allow solar radiation through the water, and you set it out for maybe 6 hours, and it would improve the water quality, but it's not as good as boiling the water. So yeah, that is what I had for you guys today. Is there any questions? Nope. Then I'll just do.
Thank you, Eric, for a very thorough and interesting presentation. Atle, you were Eric's mentor in the fieldwork, and it would be interesting to hear a bit about your experiences as well.
Yes. Do you think with Eric, or in general? I will start maybe.
In general, might be a bit too long for this presentation.
You still hear me? I got. Yep. And yes, I will. This was my first engagement with Engineers Without Borders, so it was.
Sorry, it's not very good, the sound, Atle. Try to adjust the microphone a bit.
Ja, vi hørte deg, men du må ha mikken nærmere. Du må ha mikken nærmere.
It's something wrong with my.
Bedre nå, altså.
Okay. Then you can hear me. Yes, this was my first engagement with the Engineers Without Borders. So it was interesting for me, and I found it very interesting. And first of all, I would say something about the Engineers Without Borders, and I think also the preparation before we went out in the field was very good. I very much appreciated for instance, the code of conduct, the ethical standards. I think it's very important. And also to prepare for the field work. I mean, also to be out in the field. I've been out in Africa doing field work before, some years ago. This was our first experience for Erik. And I know that doing field work in Africa can be challenging, tiring, and a lot of unforeseen challenges as well. So I think also Erik made an excellent job preparing before we left Norway. I think that was very good. I challenged him also. I stressed him on that also. I think it was very important. And because good preparation, then you can be, okay, it's you meet challenges, or you can be prepared for the challenges. And I think we managed very well to do the preparation, at least for our own work. We made some challenges to get visa and so on. That was actually quite tiring and stressful. I think we got our visa just a few days before we left Norway. I couldn't stop the whole process. But that's something more about the embassy and the work around that. And then about Trucks Ghana. You may say that it was very, very, very good preparation for them their side. So I was very impressed about how they organized the field work for us. So it made this actually very easy for us. And I think that based on my experience, it made this very easy. And if Erik also wanted to do another job, he may confront more problems that actually we experienced. So thank you for doing that very well preparation for us, Vincent. Yep, that was very good. We get old guide in the field, and it was prepared before we went into the area, so people know that we were coming. So we had a good also discussion with the locals. So that was also very, very good. And also we managed to do a lot of field work, more that I actually assumed we managed, or initially managed, I thought we should do. But we managed to do that. We made some errors and we made some experiences also, but I think in general it went very well. And also I must also say that a few days ago, Eirik, he became a civil engineer. He got a B on his thesis, or his master thesis. So congratulations on that. And that's good. And I think that to take a master like this, that you actually have to dig or force your data out of Africa, it's much more easy masters to do than that. So I think you managed very well on that also. So and maybe also say something about the fieldwork itself, or what to do to continue this work. I may say, even though we found some fecal bacteria in the groundwater, even though we find some maybe leaking wells. In general, I would say that the water supply in the area was pretty good, I would say. Maybe you may confront some problems during the heavy rain season, but in general, I would say the water quality was good. What was quite shocking is actually the sanitation at the schools we're visiting. So to follow that, I think would be very important. I mean, just as hand washing, in some of the schools, they didn't have any possibility to do hand washing. They didn't even have soap, meaning that, and it's open defecation, meaning that when the pupils, when they went out in the forest or the field to relieve themselves, well, no paper, and they had to wash their hands. They grab on the handle on the well. Maybe they also contaminated the tap itself. So you can bring in good water, but if you don't have good sanitation at the same times, the work for bringing in good water, it's just a waste of time, I would say. So to follow up on this, I would think that to focus on sanitation will be the most important thing to do, and not follow up. We can also do some maybe improvement of some of the wells itself, but I think to follow up on it, sanitation at the primary school is very important. Okay, that was in short my experience.
Thank you, Atle. We have a few minutes left. Is there any questions out there? Ingrid?
Yes, I was thinking about one thing.
Sorry, it seems that I lost my...
Can you hear?
I can't hear you. Why so?
Okay, but I think the question is for Erik, and it seems like you can hear me. Or yeah, okay, so I'll continue. It was I was wondering, how did you decide on who to interview? Because you said you wanted to have quite a lot of women, because women are mostly affected by the water, like with a good water supply. Was it you that decided on who to interview, or was it someone else?
We had our local guide, who, as well as the assemblyman, which is the community representative, and we just stated that we wanted to talk with a lot of. We stressed it to the guide as well as the assemblyman, the community representative, that we wanted to talk to women, and why we wanted to. But when it came to it, it was they who decided who we interviewed, as well as we had to be flexible to who was available, because it was in the daytime, people were working, and we couldn't just take and talk to whoever we wanted. People had to be want to talk to us. So, but we stressed it to our local guide as well as the community representatives, and I think we ended up with approximately 60-70% women.
Yeah, and when you had larger groups, would you say that the group, they were agreeing on most of the questions that you asked, or were there many disagreements within the group connected to one place as well?
They didn't necessarily disagree or anything. I picked the questionnaire from JMP because it is a good questionnaire for people in the field, because it's open questions, and you can't really, they are formulated in a way that forces a response. And it also, what was more challenging was that people were reluctant to answer honestly. Not that they necessarily disagreed, but when you kind of ask grown-ups, especially about defecation and how their bowel movements are, they're not necessarily very voluntarily answering, because it might be very embarrassing. But yeah, we stated that it was for research purposes, and in my opinion, people were very welcoming and very helpful in their answers. Yeah, if that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Vincent, I was gonna ask you, but then you raised your hand.
I know. Being a host, at least I know you'll be expecting me to say something. First of all, I want to congratulate Eric for your graduation. Congratulations. And also to thank Atle for being your supervisor. And also to thank Engineers Without Borders for sponsoring this third week. I must say I was really doubtful looking at the time available for you people to do this way. But at the end of the day, I was shocked what you were able to achieve within a limited time. I used to host students, and I can tell you the minimum I could remember is between 4 weeks to 3 months. So if I'm not mistaken, Eric's third work with tracks might be the least so far. But comparatively, he equally was able to achieve a lot within the limited time. But like Adela mentioned, also depends upon how the groundwork was done, how well organized you were before coming to Ghana. And also before you came, at least there were some preparations that also facilitated your work. You can remember where initially you were supposed to gather data, we have to relocate or reselect the communities because of the bridge issue, the bridge collapse. So we have to quickly move to another community to be able to arrange that. The issue that came out during the research are so revealing. We know these are the issues. Again, your field work has confirmed what we really know in terms of open edification and especially. And to some of us, the most worrying aspect as people who are working now with schools, Engineers Without Borders, supporting, pumping in money to support schools is the fact that most of the water samples that you took and analyzed in those schools have been contaminated. And these are children who are drinking those water. And as you've mentioned, after the open edification, they don't even have soap or anything to wash their hands. You'll really be surprised that most of the older people here, when they go to hospitals or clinics these days, they go and the report is that they have typhoid fever. And if you want to know much about typhoid, it's just like somebody taking in fecal material, this and the water is polluted. And it's so common even here in Bulgaria, all because of open defecation in some areas. So these are so much common. But like I've mentioned, maybe we need to look at the schools in particular, especially when they don't even have soap to wash even their hands. Like the school you visited where the sewage system is so bad, and that day we went, you saw flies all over the place. And then some of the kids have carried food to the school. So those flies land on their food, they eat, they have nothing to wash their hands. And it's so bad a situation. So at the end of the day, when we, like Engineers Without Borders, support us to put up the schools and all these things, and the kids are not healthy, it goes to defeat the purpose of which all these facilities are being put up for them. So Atle mentioned it, we need to maybe look at closely, maybe we need to pick up this issue again in terms of the hygiene or sanitation situation, at least in the basic schools. What can we do to improve upon it? We know most of these communities are so poor, they are unable to even pay for, they maintain their boreholes. But can there be any attempt or any way to see how at least simple hygiene situation could be improved in the schools? I think that should be our concern. So thank you once again for coming over to throw more light on what we know, but more revealing to us the bad nature of what you've already known. So to me, your coming for the third work has also helped us to understand or to deepen our understanding of things on the ground. So I'm much grateful to Engineers Without Borders who sponsored the trip, and also to Attila, your supervisor, and also you, Eric, coming over. I'm so grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. For those who want to read the full mastery thesis, I posted the link in the chat. It's published on our webpage. And then I'm sure Heidi would also be very happy that I mention that there will be another digital presentation not next Thursday, 13th of April, and that link is also in the chat. Completely different project that has to do with the plastic recycling. Thank you, Erik. Congratulations on your masters, and thank you, Atle, for a well performed assignment in the field. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
It was
Thank
very
you.
interesting.